Today we're looking. Oh yeah, today's the 8th part of the English Civil War series by Kings and Generals. The link to this video is down below if you want to see it without my face or me talking over it or anything. And today's about the second battle of Newbury. So last time we left off, it seems like King Charles himself is going to be fighting. He did get a victory last video, so it's not like he has no experience, but he also did mess up pretty hard last video, getting himself into trouble that Rupert had to come save him, even though that failed because Rupert lost. But point is, yeah, so I'm not gonna lie, I feel a little bit iffy. I don't think Charles is gonna do well. I think the Royalists definitely are losing momentum, and Parliament is going, their stock is rising. Now, I really want to get into this video, but before I do, I would like to say please like, comment, subscribe. It really helps out my small but humble channel, and you know, if you enjoy my content and anything I have to say, or if you've been sticking around or want to stick around, it would mean the world to me, and I would appreciate it very much. Thank you, and let's get to it, shall we? Without any further ado, let's see the second battle of Newbury.
A pitched battle with the approaching parliamentarian army. The Royalist army formed up in order of battle to the north of Newbury, with its right flank resting on the Kennet River, its centre strengthened by the fortified position of the Shaw House, and its left anchored by Donnington Castle. On October 26th, the Parliamentary Army initiated contact with the Royalists, probing their lines against the backdrop of small-scale skirmishing. On Clay Hill, Parliamentarian cannons opened a heavy bombardment against the Royalists in the Shaw House. Meanwhile, the parliamentary senior generals convened for a council of war. Probably at the behest of Waller, the parliamentarians adopted an attack plan in which their army would conduct a circuitous march to the north around the Royalist lines, then assault their extreme left flank through Speen Village. A simultaneous attack would be launched against the eastern end of the Royalist line at the Shaw House.
Okay, that's an interesting plan. Let me get that one more time.
Attack plan in which their army would conduct a circuitous march to the north around the Royalist lines, then assault their extreme left flank through Speen Village.
Oh.
A simultaneous attack would be launched against the eastern end
Oh, okay. This is an interesting maneuver
of the Royalist line at the Shaw House. The flanking columns would have to march a distance of 13 miles.
Yeah, I was about to say that's an interesting move of attack, and really, we can all boil it down to it being the flank, the oldest trick in the book that they're gonna try to use. An ambitious move, a very utilized move. In fact, the most utilized move we've ever seen in this channel's history in every era of war. But once executed, usually very successful. Though this one's very, like I said, there is a lot of land to cover, so the flanking column, I think he was about to get to it, but that's like quite the distance, right? While the left would be simultaneously attacking, they would have to essentially, I'm assuming that's the diversion, or at least to keep the enemy pinned down. That's what I'm assuming that this column is going to stay and attack for, while the others get them caught off guard. And if they're moving, I'm wondering if they're just gonna do it out in the open, or if they're hidden enough to get away with it. We'll explain. Like I said, it's an interesting move. Like I said, I think the flank is the king of all moves. But let's see how it plays out. I'm feeling a bit like iffy about the plan, but we'll see.
Speen Village. A simultaneous attack would be launched against the eastern end of the Royalist line at the Shaw House. The flanking columns would have to march a distance of 13 miles, moving through villages and across the Lambourne before turning east towards Wickham Heath to Speen. Instructions were given out that a cannon shot would signal the commencement of the attack by the flanking force, while Manchester began his own assault on the Shaw House.
Okay, so it seems like the right column is the right flank is the one that's going to perform the maneuver, and the center and the left of the Parliament forces are going to be attacking. So I'm assuming, like I said earlier, that the straight up attacks from these sides is to keep the enemy pinned down and distracted in the heat of the battle, so the right can better perform. Because the flank really is better performed when the enemy doesn't see it coming, right? So that's what I would assume. Like I said, I think it's a good plan. They would have to move really quick. I think that's probably the biggest factor of how quickly they can cover these miles and move.
Gathering intelligence on the Roundheads' intentions, the king shifted Prince Maurice's Cornish foot regiments and horse squadrons to Speen, where they set to work building a sturdy redoubt armed with several cannon. To his intentions and his own assault on
they got intelligence. I think that was covered last video, that there was some intelligence given to Charles from either a prisoner or deserter. I can't remember at the moment. It was a few days ago, but that helped with his attack after the Battle of Morstan Moor. So Charles still seems to be gaining some type of intel and preparing accordingly. So that already kind of now undoes the attack of the flank. And I said I think the flank works best when the enemy doesn't see it coming. A more prepared enemy now. But then again, we've seen this before. I think of the Battle of Thermopylae that took place between the Seleucid Empire and the Roman Empire, to where Antiochus, you know, he held the same position in Thermopylae that the Spartans had against the Persians. And yeah, Antiochus has held the same position as the Spartans had against the Persians. And again, everyone knew the weakness of Thermopylae, mainly going around and attacking from the rear, and the Romans obviously were gonna do that, and Antiochus set up some of his soldiers to block the pathway so that flank wouldn't happen, but the Romans still beat those forces and still managed to get behind Antiochus's force. So that was a flank that everyone saw coming, and it just relied on the Romans breaking through the natural defenses. So I'm wondering if that's what's going to happen. Sure, Charles is now ready and preparing for this maneuver, but I'm wondering if they can still break through and still threaten, you know, the rear of Charles's army. I don't know. So we'll see. I'm just in speculating battle analysis mode. So I'm kind of a little bit hyped. I love seeing the flank, so we'll see how it all goes. Or maybe... No, let's keep going.
House. Gathering intelligence on the Roundheads' intentions, the king shifted Prince Maurice's Cornish foot regiments and horse squadrons to Speen, where they set to work building a sturdy redoubt armed with several cannon. 3 brigades of foot occupied the ground around Shaw village, while Sir Humphrey Bennet's brigade of horses held the army.
Okay, but I think this is a good move, that if Parliament still goes with their OG plan, this is a great way to thwart the plan and slow it down if it is a successful defense, or to bog them down. But these columns that are attacking the left and the center still outnumber Charles's left and center. I mean, look at the difference right here. So they could just brood away their force and win here. I don't know, it seems like Charles is outnumbered on this one. Again, I don't want to talk... I'm a bit iffy about Charles. I don't feel so confident in him, especially after his mess up last video, but he did gain a victory. So Kings and Generals did mention he gained a victory over Parliament still. So, I don't know, we'll see, but these odds still seem... At least numerically, the odds seem kind of stacked against him, according to this.
Centre, with detachments further south at Newbury and the crossing points of the Lambourne at Bangor, and on the route of the enemy's flanking march at Boxford. In the early morning hours of October 27th, the Parliamentarian flanking force began its march. Before it could cross the Lambourne, it was spotted by the Royalists in Donnington Castle. The Royalist horse detachment at Boxford was driven off by the Roundheads in the late morning, and soon the Parliamentarians were crossing Wickham Heath and approaching Speen. Rather than wait for Waller's cannon signal, Manchester opened his attack on the Royalist right at the Shaw House and in Shaw Village. Despite initially gaining success in their attacks, the parliamentarians under the slow-moving Manchester were driven back in disarray and confusion.
Oh wow. Yeah, I was worried about the left and center. No wait. The center and right. Sorry, I perspective shift. So the center and right of Charles's, since they're so outnumbered compared to the left and centers of Parliament. But that's a cool way. That's a cool start.
Waller's flanking columns reached their attack positions at 3 p.m, but they came under a heavy artillery barrage by guns in Prince Maurice's redoubt, and from the 4 guns in Donnington Castle.
Oh wow.
800 musketeers from Essex's army, supported by a brigade of horse, assaulted the redoubt, while the remaining parliamentary forces surged into Speen Village, clashing with Maurice's Cornish infantry inside the town. Within an hour, the redoubt and Speen Village had both fallen into parliamentary hands, forcing Maurice's regiments back in a confused retreat. Following up the success, Balfour led his horse squadrons in pursuit of Maurice's Cornishmen, but found themselves slamming against a reserve line outside Speen, commanded in person by the king. Through the efforts of the king's lifeguard, Charles was prevented from being captured by Balfour's troopers. As the daylight hours waned into the evening, Cromwell brought up a reserve retinue of cavalry, but apparently failed to seize the initiative and promptly attack the collapsing royalist line. Lord Goring's horse charged Cromwell's own cavalry, and before long Cromwell was being driven back.
Oh wow.
Meanwhile, Balfour's horse were coming under fire from companies of musketeers posted in the ditches and around the hedges on the outskirts of Speen. Balfour's troopers were swiftly counterattacked and driven back by a rallied brigade of royalist horsemen under Sir Humphrey Bennet. Back on the royalist right flank, Manchester began his second assault.
Okay, that was an interesting exchange right there. So the flanking maneuver was bogged down and slowed down. It did not go as planned as they had originally thought. Still, Charles was driven from Speen and his original defensive position, but he did prevent a complete collapse on this side, and kind of managed to stabilize, and overall kind of just opened a different front right here, right? But again, at least he kind of prevented them from the complete flanking maneuver that they wanted, so that's a minor W right there. But like I said, I'm worried about his right and center here.
Around 4:30, with daylight fast fading away. He dispatched 2 columns from Clay Hill, the right-hand column engaging the Shaw House, while the larger left-hand column moved into Shaw Village. However, both of these attacks were halted by stubborn royalist resistance and pushed back with severe losses. Before the parliamentarian advance could continue on either end of the battlefield, darkness fell on the beleaguered troops, promptly ending the engagement. Against all odds, and despite the near capture of the king, Charles's army managed to retreat unimpeded, partially because of Manchester's reluctance to press the attack. The king's final campaigns of the year were similarly successful. Manchester once again failed to decisively attack the Royalists on November 9th at Speen Hamlet, and a week later was unable to stop Charles relieving Banbury. On the 23rd, relative optimism pervaded the king's camp as the soldiers went into winter quarters.
Okay, that was an overall interesting scenario. I went into this not feeling confident with Charles. I almost thought he would have a complete, L right now. But that wasn't an L. They had failed, Parliament failed to destroy him. He managed to repel their flanking maneuver and their attacks, and managed to pull out without any major losses. So yeah, I guess that went much better for him than even I expected. So I apologize to Charles on that one. I kind of underestimated him right there. I expected worse, but was pleasantly surprised with that one.
Parliament's failure to successfully end the war in late 1644 prompted recriminations and blame among the increasingly factionalized set of MPs during the winter of 44–45. More consequentially, it led radicals such as Oliver Cromwell and William Waller to begin speaking in favour of establishing a completely different style of military. It would be, as Trevor Royal put it, a professional and disciplined regular force, well paid and well equipped, under the control of an independent commander-in-chief. In short, it would be a permanent army staffed by dedicated experts, detached from the politicking of Parliament, whose sole aim was to gain victory over the king. After weeks of inquiry and debate, this new model army finally came to be on
Okay. It's kind of like the idea of this. It's similar to the idea of a standing army, or is it a standing army? But like this, permanent professional force under the idea of under the leadership of a commander-in-chief. Yeah, that seems much familiar to what we kind of get later on in certain countries. So again, I have to say, Parliament, Charles, in some aspects, the royalists seem a bit more passive than Parliament. And what I mean by that is that Parliament, you see them trying different things with their idea with inviting the Scottish to invade. Their diplomatic idea is what helped them gain so much territory in the north. And then here they're implementing these new ideas with the military. They have this certain initiative that they're seizing. While the royalists, they'll gain their victory and kind of not do much with it, and we don't really, so far we haven't heard from kings and generals them making any significant changes to the way they fight, or, using any other tools like diplomacy or whatnot. The most we've got is with Rupert, who utilized his knowledge from the 30 Years' War, but that's about it, and that's just him. So, again, Parliament seems to be using different tricks and implementing changes along as they go along, which I think is helping them. Like I said, their use of diplomatic warfare by inviting the Scottish to join is what helped them secure so much of the territory here in the north. So I feel like in that aspect they have a one-up against the royalists,
January 11th, 1645, when the Commons passed the New Model Ordinance and began mustering 12 regiments of 1,200 footmen each, 10 regiments of cavalry, each numbering 600 troopers, and 1 regiment of 1,000 dragoons. 10 days later, supreme command of the New Model Army was granted to Sir Thomas Fairfax, due to a combination of extensive military experience, and because although he was unquestionably loyal to the parliamentarian cause, he was not a member of Parliament.
Oh wow.
Henceforth, members of Parliament were largely barred from holding commands, ending the military careers of the Earls of Manchester and Essex. Though the embryonic New Model Army would become immensely formidable in the course of months and years, it needed time to fill its ranks and become an effective fighting force. This necessity determined a measured parliamentary offensive strategy in the early months of 1645.
Yeah, it gives me the vibe of like a standing professional army that we've seen in other like civilizations utilize like this. And yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I'm keep calling it. It seems to follow that same vein, right?
It also made the continued cooperation of Levin's Scots very valuable. However, the Covenanters were becoming wary of providing too much assistance to their English allies. This was partly because the Scots feared radicals such as Cromwell would renege on the Solemn League, and partly because in Charles's northern kingdom, royalist allies were causing utter chaos. Back in September 1643, the warring factions in Ireland signed a peace which freed up English royalist soldiers to be sent over to assist the king. The agreement also allowed the Irish Confederates, whose alliances were constantly shifting, to renew their war against the Presbyterian Scots and parliamentarians. Therefore, at the end of June 1644, 2,000 Irish mercenaries raised by the royalist Earl of Antrim sailed to Ardnamurchan in Scotland under Scotsman Alistair MacCulloch. Upon landing, McCulloch immediately began rallying Highland chiefs who were bitterly hostile to the Covenanter Campbell clan, such as leaders of the McPhersons and MacDonalds, to war.
Yo, did you catch that little McDonald's clown? Yo, I caught that, Kings and Generals. I caught that, wait.
Campbell clan, such as leaders of the McPhersons and MacDonalds, to war.
I caught that. That's a smart joke you stuck in there. Okay, this is a interesting new front. Ireland seems to kind of now, like, maybe not directly, like, in league with, well, kind of directly. The point is they're helping the Royalists in terms of fighting off Parliament and the Scottish, and this is a good development for the Royalists as it's giving them more troops and a new front to stage this invasion. So, yeah, good move so far. This is an interesting development that I feel like the Royalists kind of needed right at the moment.
Meanwhile, in Oxford, James Graham, otherwise known as the Marquis of Montrose, had defected from the Covenanters before the Civil War began. With the threat of his countrymen's pro-parliamentarian intervention at the forefront, Charles appointed Montrose his Lord Lieutenant in Scotland and sent him north with only 2 loyal companions. When Montrose arrived, he joined with McCulloch at Blair Athol, and the two immediately made common cause. This was convenient for both men, because, as Stuart Reid points out, Montrose was in need of an army, and McCulloch was just as desperately in need of an employer.
Mutually beneficial alliance there. And again, this is good because it opens pressure on Scotland and really frees up the pressure that the Royalists were having. So this is a good development for the Royalists for sure.
This ragtag army of unlikely Celtic allies and even unlikelier Royalists moved south to Perth. Outside of the city, on the plains of Tippermore, Montrose and McCulloch defeated a Covenanter army about the same size as their own, whose infantry was primarily made up of raw recruits. Soon they learned that a large Covenanter force was assembling at Stirling. Seeking to get clear of it and to raise local allies, Montrose marched north and bypassed Dundee on the way to Aberdeen, where another enemy army awaited him. Despite facing an army that outnumbered his own and which had taken a strong position, Montrose and his Irish colleague smashed the Covenanter loyalists again, inflicting 520 casualties and suffering only minimal losses of their own.
Wow, okay. Alright, they're making headway here, this ragtag group. Okay, this is an interesting new front that just opened.
Due to the death of his favorite drummer boy, who was shot in cold blood during pre-battle negotiations, Montrose let his troops viciously sack Aberdeen for 4 days on September 13, 1644. This event, fueled by generations-long blood feuds and sectarian hatred, would become known as Black Friday.
Oh, wow.
In October
Dang! That is interesting. That's an interesting origin there for the term. I did not know that. But yeah, I've heard of Black Friday, obviously. Though the term Black Friday here in the US is kind of to, you know, it references the busiest shopping day of the year here. I've never actually went out shopping on Black Friday because there are some horror stories of people just long lines and everyone fighting to get stuff. It's yeah, I've never went out shopping on Black Friday, but you know, yeah.
1644, Montrose campaigned throughout Aberdeenshire against his Covenanter rival, the Earl of Argyll, meeting his numerically superior forces in battle at Phoebe, where neither side was able to gain an advantage. When winter drew in, Argyll went back to Strathbogie and Montrose marched back over the hills to Blair Athol. Far more consequential than simply beating a few small Scottish armies, Montrose's actions were beginning to affect the war's greater strategic situation. The Covenanter government, growing concerned with Royalist success in their backyard, ordered Leven to detach 9 regiments of his own army, led by Marston Moor veteran.
Yeah, you know what this is giving me vibes of? Kind of like when Hannibal just jumped Rome in their own backyard, him and his ragtag group, and started having victories. It kind of reminds me of that. Granted, he's not like having like Hannibal levels of casualties, but you know what I mean. Like the same principle of he's in their backyard now and causing havoc which is distracting the Covenants, right? So, like I said, this was a good move for the Royalists overall to help divide the enemy further and distract them.
William Bailey to stop Montrose. Argyle and Bailey managed to unite their forces, but constant disagreement led to the two men parting company soon after. Montrose, unwilling to give his rivals a moment to relax, undertook a perilous march and descended on Argyle's 3,000-strong army with 1,500 of his own at Inverlochy on February 2nd. Again, the Marquis won a complete victory against a vastly superior force. These events ensured that—
Dude, Montrose, man. Okay, he's a new competent force. Before it was just mainly Rupert kind of carrying, but now he's kind of like having his own success here. That's just pretty cool.
Covenanter priorities would be directed away from winning the war in England, and diverted the attention of Levin's army away from the brewing campaign of 1645. Instead, they remained in the Scottish marches to prevent Montrose from receiving reinforcements from Charles. The parliamentarians were on their own.
Wow.
With the Royalists lacking any real strategic direction, and Parliament waiting for its new army to sharpen its claws, campaigning in the south began in a disjointed manner. In the west, an array of the king's commanders attempted to secure the Welsh marches and take pressure off Chester. In the far south, Lord Goring ravaged Hampshire before retreating to Salisbury at the end of January. Hundreds of miles north, Marmaduke Langdale's Northern Horse managed to relieve Pontefract in early March, and was back in the Royalist stronghold of Newark by March 4th. The Committee of both Kingdoms fired the opening shot in Parliament's 1645 campaign by ordering Cromwell, who had returned from sparring with Goring's forces in the West Country,
Your roommate just
to move just east of Oxford on April 21st. Meanwhile, Fairfax led the bulk of the new model army from Windsor to Reading, where he and his 10,000 were resupplied. While the now fully supplied Fairfax set about marching west to save Taunton from siege, Cromwell repeatedly harassed Charles's forces near their capital, brazenly seizing all the cart horses which would be needed to transport artillery, and preventing the royal army from leaving. However, when Goring and his 4,000 returning cavalry encountered Cromwell at Radcott Bridge on May 3rd, the parliamentarian horse retreated south into friendly territory. With the troublesome parliamentary cavalry commander out of the way, Charles marched from Oxford to Stow-on-the-Wold with his troops, where he conferred with prominent royalist leaders, including Goring, Rupert and others. Once again, the Council of War argued about the correct course to take, eventually concluding that Goring and 3,000 horse would split off west and bring Taunton into royalist hands, while the main royalist army would go north. Reacting to the enemy's movement, the committee changed its mind about the new model army's goals and sent its leader new orders. Reluctantly obeying, Fairfax sent 4 regiments to Taunton and turned most of his soldiers back, with the aim of an eventual rendezvous with Cromwell. The latter shadowed Charles's army from afar as it marched towards Chester, but was unable to prevent the Royalists from lifting the siege there. Parliament sent messages asking Levin for aid, but Montrose's continuing success in Scotland left the Covenanters unable and unwilling to divert resources south. Partially because the committee believed that Oxford would surrender without a fight due to bad information, Fairfax was ordered to besiege the city beginning May 21st, news which reached the Royalists only a few days later. In response, Charles's field army unexpectedly pivoted and began marching southeast towards Leicester, an important parliamentary garrison, which was reached just over a week later. Aiming to distract the new model army besieging their increasingly food-deprived capital, the Royalists attacked. A savage 2-day clash over the town's defences and a veritable violent storm of cannon shot followed, after which Leicester's garrison was overwhelmed and the city stormed and looted. However, 400 Royalist troops were dead, and many times more wounded, depleting the king's strength severely. Seeing the danger of continuing to fight, and having gained much plunder, soldiers began to desert Charles and head home.
Oh, dang. Again, oh boy, that completely backfired. Oh man. I feel like the Royalists have a discipline problem. Like, we kind of been seeing it on both sides, but mainly the Royalists. There are times they could have had greater victories, but their soldiers decided to plunder or raid or pursue an enemy. And here's another example. The Royalists don't have discipline. Their soldiers seem to lack it more, and Parliament's new army that they started, I think will have less. I mean, I could be wrong, but it seems like it would create more opportunity for discipline. And we saw with Cromwell's forces, and the victory he gained, he has discipline over his soldiers. So I feel like Parliament is starting to gain more discipline over their soldiers, while Charles's side, the Royalists, lack that more. Which I think it already kind of has been a factor, a pretty big one in this war, you know?
His remaining army stayed in and around Leicester until June 4th, when it moved on to Daventry. Meanwhile, the fall of such an important Midlands garrison prompted the committee's order for Fairfax to raise the siege of Oxford and go bring Charles to battle. On June 9th, 1645, two key decisions were made by Parliament. Firstly, Fairfax was given strategic independence from the committee. Secondly, Oliver Cromwell, Parliament's rising star, was confirmed in his assignment to the heretofore vacant position of Lieutenant General of Horse in the new model army.
Wow.
Realizing that a fight might be on.
Alright. So, we're gonna look at this battle tomorrow. I'll end the video right here, and I'll see you guys then.